the point where we were discussing the urine getting formed, and one of the things that I want to remind us about, we've got the two types of nephrons. We had the ones that were called cortical, and then we had the ones that were juxtamedullary. And the reason for that, in this formation of urine, the amount of fluid that is going to pass through the nephrons, I'm not sure if you guys remember the GFR, but the glomerular filtration rate, you know, that was at like 150 liters per day. Not sure if you guys remember that, okay? But we have to concentrate that down to where we are only putting out about 1 to 2 liters of urine per day, because that's the normal amount. So having these two different nephrons in the structure of the kidney, I'm trying to see, does anybody see any of the kidney? Oh, they got moved. Okay. So, in the structure of the kidney, we have the cortex, the medulla, okay? In the medulla, we've got those renal pyramids. The renal pyramids, if we've got the two types of nephrons, we had the ones that were termed cortical because the majority of it was here in the cortex area, with just a small amount dipping into the medulla. The ones that were juxtamedullary, if you remember their loop, okay, the loop dipped very far into the medulla. Does everybody remember that about the structure? Okay. If a lot of this fluid that is passing through is water-based, this means we've got to get that fluid, that water, back to the body. So we're going to find that as we dip into the medulla, it gets more salty. Does everybody remember that? Okay? And if we've got these processes of materials having to move through the loop, and we're going to have some stuff return or basically come back out of the loop, okay? Then we're going to have all these blood vessels, all right? What we're going to find is we have to have some materials return back to the body. Others will get to continue through that loop. And by having one of those types of nephrons dip rather deeply into the medulla, where it's going to be salty, okay? We're now dependent on stuff such as osmosis, where water likes to go from the area of high to low. We're going to see that movement of some of the particles, meaning those electrolytes, the salts, for example. Water and salts will actually follow each other. The goal being that by the time we've concentrated down this huge amount of fluid that's coming through the kidneys, by the time we make it to actual urine, that's what we have formed with the nitrogenous waste, i.e. urea, for example. But salts and stuff, hopefully, for the most part, we've returned back to the body. So, based upon the structure of the nephron, the actual formation of urine is done in stages. Based upon the area of the nephron that you're going to be looking at, if we're looking at this area of the glomerulus, if we're looking at the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop, the descending, the ascending, descending, the distal convoluted tubule, the collecting duct, something is happening at each structure. So when we look at how we're going to start forming urine, we do not refer to it as urine until it's actually leaving the kidney. Okay? Until we get to the point where we're at the collecting duct and we're getting into the minor and the major calyx, okay? That's the point we actually have urine. Up to that point, it is always termed filtrate. Okay? So, up to the point where basically we're almost at the end, making our way to the ureters, it's filtrate. So, in stage 1, the way that we can have control over the nephrons, if you remember, we have autoregulation, which is where that glomerular filtration rate, the GFR, is being controlled by the nephrons themselves. But if you remember, we're also going to have the involvement of our autonomic nervous system. That means the sympathetic division. Okay? So, with this division of the autonomic nervous system, under sympathetic control, it is going to constrict my afferent arteriole. Now remember, we are at an area, okay, that's microscopic. However, the pressure coming in, is it high or low? It's high, because these are, the renal arteries are the first branch that this descending aorta hits. So we're already under tremendous pressure entering into the kidneys. The structure that we get between my afferent and my efferent. Once again, do you guys remember how one side bigger, smaller? Okay? The goal of that is to take that blood that's under pressure as we move into this glomerulus, this ball of capillaries, which they're trying to show a cutaway right here, and then they're trying to show them with their wrapping. Do you guys remember the podocytes, okay, that are going to create the other slits and stuff? The goal is to make sure that as the blood enters and as it begins to pass through the glomerulus, that the pressure is just right. We don't want it too high because these can burst. Okay, so under normal conditions, all right, as this high pressure blood moves through this glomerulus, it begins to push stuff out. So the fluid and all the materials that get to make it through this wrapping, that the fluid and all the materials collect here in this Bowman's capsule. Does everybody remember that? Okay? At this point, it's now filtrate. Once the filtrate forms, we're going to then begin to move through the tubular system. Now, under certain conditions, we can have this blood flow increased, decreased. The goal is to make sure, for the most part, that we are still getting a steady flow of blood through these glomeruli. Well, we know that in cases of, I think we talked about exercise, circulatory shock, okay? But wait a minute. What if someone has blood pressure problems? One of the things that I keep mentioning with these organs, blood pressure affects them highly. Someone who has chronic high blood pressure, for example, one of the organs of their body that's going to get damaged is their kidneys. The reason that the person is put on blood pressure medications is in the hope that they keep their blood pressure under normal conditions, and they're not doing damage, number one, to their kidneys, but to many other organs of the body. So, at the point where we're at stage 1, do you guys remember us mentioning when we talked about the blood, when we talked about the lungs, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone mechanism? They refer to it as RA. That's how you'll see it in tests. In tests, you're going to see it as RAA. So here's what's going to happen. Blood pressure can go either direction. It can go up, it can go down. We're going to find that we have mechanisms in the body that will kick in, okay? In some cases, medication will help by making sure it stays that way normally if it becomes a chronic condition. So, in the case, for example, hemorrhaging at a time when there might be trauma, okay? Dehydration. We kind of talked about how, I love this, how the majority of us are probably not hydrated correctly, okay? And if you are physically active, you tend to need more water than not. Information that we can get from the baroreceptors can also affect it. What could be the clinical problem if something such as these issues are occurring? What is happening with the blood movement?
It's slower.
It's slower. Okay? Meaning, tissues of the body are not getting the blood supply they need. Okay? The brain stem, because it's picking up the information, wants to correct it through the sympathetic reflex. So,